So the first session of the day, it's about Eclipse IoT and the futuristic look of how Eclipse IoT is going to look like in the next 10 years. The presenter, he's a dear colleague of mine, Fre de ric. He's the program manager for IoT and Edge Computing and SPAPlug working group at the Eclipse Foundation. He's been managing the IoT and Edge computing programs at the Eclipse Foundation for the past few years. His job was really to help the community to continue to innovate and bringing devices and softwares together. He's a strong supporter and advocate of open source. In the past, he worked in different positions, from product manager, solution architect, and a developer for companies as diverse as Pivotal, Cisco, and Oracle. Frederick holds an MBA in electronic commerce, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and a Bachelor of Education, all from University of Laval in Quebec. One thing also to mention about Frederick, he's a serious writer. So one of the next projects that he's currently working on is an interesting book, which will be ready in Q4. I won't steal the light to talk about the book or anything about the content, but I know that this is something dear to his heart, and we'll be all looking forward to really reading the first copy. Frederick?
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, Hassan. And that's really bad putting some pressure on me like that on the book project and everything. But yes, I'm working on that, and stay tuned for more news, in the second half of the year. All right. Today's topic is really a kind of speculative exercise, but speculative only in the sense that we are looking forward, looking to the future. I try to make informed guesses about what our working group, what the wider IoT and edge computing market will look like. And this reflection is informed by the data gathered through our annual IoT and Edge Developer and Adoption Surveys. So the 2022 edition is currently ongoing. It will be the survey will be open till roughly mid-June. So you still have time to participate. But in any case, everything that I say is informed by that and my general knowledge of the market. All right. But before looking forward, let's look a bit at the past, because essentially when I say Eclipse IoT, the next 10 years, this is because we celebrated last year the 10th anniversary of the Eclipse IoT working group. And there is a lot to celebrate. We started with a handful of projects, a handful of committers, and now we have over 50 projects in the IoT and Edge space in various top-level projects, not just the IoT one at the Eclipse Foundation. And we had the opportunity in the context of that anniversary to remind, the early days of the working group with the pioneers in our community, people like Jan Skerrett, Andy Stanfield-Clark, and others like my predecessor, Benjamin Cabet, and Andy Piper, and even Marco Carrere from Rotec, and all of those pioneers shared their souvenirs, their memories, souvenirs being a Frenchism there, so their memories of the early days. Anyway, if you are interested in looking at those testimonies from the early days, you can scan the QR code on the slide and get right to our anniversary page on the Eclipse IoT website. And so if we take a kind of historical perspective to the development of Eclipse IoT as a community, it's really incredible to see how much development happened in the last 10 years. We started with Eclipse PAHO, Cura, and Mosquito, really the core, PAHO being MQT, a collection of MQTT clients, Mosquito being a lightweight but very powerful MQTT broker, and Eclipse Cura, a Java and OSGI-based solution for IoT gateways. And from there, so many other projects appeared and were contributed to the Eclipse Foundation over the years. And the one thing that's really striking when you look at that is really how much open source innovation happened in this community in the last 10 years. And in fact, at this point in time, we have over 30 million lines of code. I think the last count I've seen was 32 million or something like that. We have over 350 contributors and committers that in some cases just pushed a few fixes, in some cases just provided information about issues, and in other cases wrote literally most of the code on specific projects. So it's really incredible. And the one thing I would like to say at this point is really this community wouldn't exist without our open source contributors and committers. So thank you to every one of you. Your contributions are certainly making a difference and making this presentation possible. And not only that, but even my book project wouldn't exist without the great work done by the IoT and Edge community at the Eclipse Foundation. And they are the stars, I'm just the voice there. All right. Just to give you an idea, if you're less familiar with Eclipse IoT and the member organizations, so you see the current membership lineup there. And what's interesting is really when you look at our leader members, those are the members investing additional money in the working group and really dedicating committers on several projects, Bosch, Eurotech, and Red Hat. And what's interesting there is that you have an industry giant like Bosch around the table. So this is not just IT people coming around the concept, but really people from the industry as well. And then we have one innovator member in HiveMQ. Thank you to them. And if you look at the rest of the memberships, you will see companies from all corners of the IT universe or even from industry. We have a number of other nonprofit organizations like the AutoWare Foundation, the Dash7 Alliance, and companies from every size and shape. So thank you to every of our members, because most of those organizations contribute code, contribute ideas to our IoT and Edge ecosystem. And all of those projects really, they fit in this kind of reference architecture that we designed together at the foundation in our community meetings. And essentially, we have those three pillars of constrained devices, edge nodes, and IoT platforms. And most, if not all, of our projects have a place in there. And on the next slide, what I did is to simply place the logos of the 20-ish most popular projects that we've got in the space. And you will see we literally fill nearly all of the functional concerns in that architecture with the great open source technology that we've got. Starting with open source hardware. So we have a sister organization in the Open Hardware Group, and I will be discussing that a bit later. But with the Eclipse Foundation, not only you've got great open source software, but you can get, with our alliance with the Open Hardware Group, great open source hardware based on RISC-V as well. And this is really fantastic when you think about it. In any case, each of the projects for which you see a logo on the slide is really a well-maintained project with a healthy community. So something that you can pick up and run with right away. Although in the case of operating systems, the Oniro project is just getting started. So it's a bit maybe early to say that, but stay tuned. They will certainly have lots of interesting developments throughout 2022. Okay. That said, the focus of today's presentation is not so much the past, but me trying to, take out the crystal ball and trying to imagine, okay, what will the future look like? And, in our past, we have projects that cover protocols, IoT platforms, edge nodes, all of that. So in this section of the presentation, I would try to take a step back and identify broader trends that I feel could be relevant to you as as an audience member. And I know Hassan didn't mention this in his introduction, but please, if you have any questions or even reactions or comments about the contents of the presentation, please use the sections comment in SwapCard, and Hassan at the end will bring the questions to me, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Okay, so first trend that I see happening, C is here to stay and Rust will grow. So this is about programming languages. So when you look at the current landscape, and our annual surveys really really provide data that support that. C is the top level language, the number one language on embedded or constrained devices. On edge nodes and in the cloud, it's a different story, and there you will have a mix of JavaScript and Go and other options. But on constrained devices, really C is in the lead, and to some extent C++ as well. So in our surveys, we put the two of them together since they are so close. The reason why it's so important is that, well, most of the real-time operating systems that you can leverage are based on it, right? You think about FreeRTOS, you think about Zephyr, you think about Embed from ARM, all of those open source real-time operating system solutions that you can use on constrained devices, they are written in C or C++, and you can or must use those languages to leverage them in your project. So I think it's safe to say that C will still be around 10 years from now. Now, what I see really in the crystal ball is that Rust is really growing in the space. There are a number of projects that essentially enable you to write firmware for constrained devices based on Rust. So you're not necessarily running on the top on an RTOS, but the Rust runtime libraries provide you the basic building blocks and drivers or device integration in some cases. And the reason for that is quite simple, right? C is fantastic. It's portable, sometimes hard to read, depending who writes it. But memory safety is certainly not one of its strengths, and that is literally in the design of the language. You do memory allocation manually. So in the case of Rust, you get memory safety for free. And this is why it's so attractive for IoT and Edge developers. So we see lots of growth in that space. And already we've seen that in the Edge native working group, where the Eclipse Zeno protocol, so a next generation pub/sub protocol that you can use for Edge deployments and IoT projects. It's a fantastic solution, much better, in my opinion, than DDS. And Zeno is all written in Rust. So that's our first major project using the language. We have also in our wider ecosystem, that's not necessarily an Eclipse project, but a project from Red Hat, Drogue IoT, which is a solution with a device framework and a cloud platform, all of that written in Rust once again. And we have strong advocates for it in the Eclipse IoT community. So hello, Jens and Dion. Anyway, so Rust is there today, and certainly I see it growing. 10 years from now, we'll certainly have tons of new Rust projects in the Eclipse IoT space for sure. Second prediction is about open source hardware, and that one I teased it a bit in my overview by alluding to the Open Hardware Group. So the Open Hardware Group is a nonprofit like the Eclipse Foundation, and Eclipse is focusing on software. In their case, they focus on open source hardware based on RISC-V. RISC-V is open and even open source, but it's really just the instruction set for microprocessors. So if you can design your own chips, that's great. But for run-of-the-mill IoT developers, that's probably a bit too involved. So what Open Hardware Group is doing is working in the open on GitHub on processor cores that then you can take and have integrate in your own microcontrollers, or even extend them or run them on FPGAs and things like that. And why they are doing that? Well, it's simply that in IoT, everything is about customization. You want to optimize battery power. You want to really fit your use case. You want to use as little memory and CPU cycles as possible. So to have the source code of the software that you run is really important. But to bring that to the next level, it's great to have the possibility to customize a chip, and really remove features that you don't need, or even add features that you would like to see, like AI acceleration and things like that. So they are doing tons of great work in that space, and really we work hand in hand with the Open Hardware Group to make that full open source RISC-V stack happen. And the way this works, you see it on the slide, where essentially Open Hardware Group is focused on processor cores and IP, and to an extent, tool chains like GCC support, FreeRTOS support, that kind of stuff. And then the Eclipse Foundation comes with the IoT building blocks that we have in Eclipse IoT and Edge computing platforms, and the basics for integrated development environments. And you combine the two, you've got a comprehensive stack that you can use to be open source, from the microcontroller all the way up to the IoT platform you would be using. So this is an important trend, because open source, if you watched Mike's keynote yesterday, Mike Milinkovic's keynote yesterday, I think you understand how important open source is to digital transformation. And so to have the ability to cover both hardware and software is invaluable there. All right, so trend number 3, 5G becomes real and 6G emerges. So, I mean, you will tell me that 5G networks are out there and that you can leverage them. So why am I saying that 5G becomes real? Well, it's one thing to have the towers in major centers and things like that, and to be able to buy a phone with support for it. But it's another thing to be able to go in the middle of nowhere and be able to count on a connection. Okay, so really what I see for the next 10 years is that 5G along NB-IoT and LTE-M and things like that will certainly make an impact on the market, not necessarily in terms of pure speed. And in IoT and even edge computing, we don't necessarily care always about pure speed, but really in terms of coverage and in terms of connection stability. That said, when you do IoT and edge, you assume that the network will fail and will be unstable and all of that, right? But in any case, really 5G will make an impact and will make possible a new range of applications. And then you need to keep an eye on 6G. I mean, the people at the 3G partnership, they always work. Once they deliver something, they always work on the next generation. So keep an eye peeled on what will happen around 6G. But in any case, this doesn't mean that alternative technologies like 802.11ah, Zigbee, Bluetooth, Z-Wave, Dash 7, all of those alternatives to cellular connectivities, they will still be around and still grow, I think, in usage, and even things like LoRaWAN as well. So in any case, the connectivity space will be quite exciting in the next 10 years. And I think that the impact of 5G is certainly something that will be decisive there. Then the next 10 years will be the decade of SPAPlug. And SPAPlug, if you're not familiar with it, it's an open specification at the Eclipse Foundation. And essentially what SPAPlug does is it solves the problem of interoperability for MQTT infrastructure. So MQTT, it's over 20 years now. It's a mature piece of technology. It's widely used and displaced many legacy protocols in the field. And it's a great thing, right? MQTT is quite flexible because essentially the specification for MQTT doesn't state anything about the payloads, and so that's great. At the same time, The problem with MQTT is that doesn't say anything about the payloads or even where to publish or subscribe the information. And that's a bit of a problem, because even if you have a robot that speaks MQTT and a software stack that speaks MQTT out of the box, they cannot interoperate. So you need to massage the payloads on one side or the other. You need to figure out where to publish, where to subscribe from. And all of that integration work is complex, error-prone, etc. So SPAPlug is essentially solving that problem by defining well-defined, extensible standard payloads and a standard topic structure, which is predictable in advance. And you can tweak it according to your needs, but the standard structure is always the same. And so SPAPlug really brings MQTT to the next level. And you can see it like a bit the relationship between HTTP and HTML. HTTP is a flexible way to transport information, and HTML is the universal language on top of it. So SPAPlug is doing that for industrial IoT and SCADA systems, in the sense that really MQTT is the transport, the widespread transport, secure, that has tremendous adoption in the market. And then SPAPlug is the language on the top of that that makes everything interoperable out of the box. And really, this is a fundamental development. And you can expect to hear a lot about SPAPlug in the second half of the year, as we are taking steps to make SPAPlug not only an Eclipse Foundation standard, but an international standard. So stay tuned for that. Now, another interesting trend that I see is that there will be no IoT deployments in the future without edge computing. So right now, we keep those things separate and discuss them in a separate way, because although IoT is one of the leading use cases for edge computing, there are many other applications for it outside of IoT. For example, in gaming, connected vehicles. I mean, there are so many things you can do with edge computing. By the way, edge computing, if you're not familiar with the concept, it's really just about putting the compute, storage, and networking resources as close to the source of the data or the end user as possible. Okay, that it's as simple as that. And in IoT, it's really important, because you don't want to have the latency of the cloud if you need to take real-time, mission-critical decisions with sensor data. Okay, essentially. So if you have an oil and gas refinery, a nuclear plant, whatever, you want that sensor data to be analyzed locally and then make decisions, maybe from AI, maybe involving humans in real time, right now, and not have the latency of going to the cloud and back. Okay, and to me, this pattern, this architecture is so useful for so many IoT applications that 10 years from now, I think you will not do IoT projects that will connect directly to the cloud. Never. We will have edge nodes that will do some part of the processing and then integrate with the cloud. Okay, at least we'll see if I'm wrong about this, but I feel strongly that this is the way going forward, unless you have a very, very simple project for home use or something like that. Maybe you will connect directly to the cloud. And even then, you want your data to be private. Maybe it's better to have a little server in your home rather than sending everything into the cloud. Number 6, I was hesitant about the label of the trend. I nearly wrote IoT will be dead, but then that would have been a downer, especially as we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of Eclipse IoT and all of that. So I rather titled this one, or described this one, as Towards Software-Defined Everything. And what I mean by that is essentially this. For the time being, we use the IoT nomenclature, right? Because there was the internet, and now we have connected things. So it's the Internet of Things because they connect to the internet. But really, what we see as a fundamental change in society right now is that everyday objects, our car, our phone, our home, and so many other things have software embedded in them, and increasingly they are connected. So saying the Internet of Things is like, I don't know, talking about the web and things like that. That's terminology from the 90s and early 21st century. So really, IoT is a bit limiting in the way it describes things as a word. And really what I see emerging as the next generation term for it is really software-defined everything. We have software-defined vehicles, software-defined homes, and all of that. Maybe this is not the actual term that will win the semantic war around this. Maybe we'll use a different term. But really what I see is that we'll cease talking about IoT and talk about something else to really include all sorts of applications for software embedded in real-world objects, okay? And to me, this is an interesting development because there are so many applications for IoT type technology that we haven't explored yet or that are not necessarily widespread at this point. And I just see the market growing. The last trend is really that your organization will contribute to open source in the sense that if you watch, once again, Mike Milinkovic's keynote yesterday, you know that open source is a driver for digital transformation. Digital transformation is here. It's here to stay. It will really transform our lives. And this means that the winners in that new market will be the ones that not only consume or use technology, okay, but the ones that really actively drive it. So contributing to open source communities, contributing to open source projects will increasingly be a skill, a core competence for organizations. Okay, and not just IT organizations, but whatever your sector is, you will have a role to play if you want to be a winner in the next 10 years. Okay, and to me, this means, well, consuming open source IoT and edge computing building blocks from Eclipse is fine, but if you want to be among the winners, among the trendsetters, you will have to actively involve yourselves in those projects and start contributing bug fixes, ideas, or even new features, and actively get involved in the wider community, which means, well, joining the Eclipse Foundation, joining the Eclipse IoT, Edge Native, and SPAPlug working groups. So I hope this will certainly happen, and certainly we'll see if I'm wrong or not, but this is definitively a trend. And if you don't believe me, watch again Mike's keynote and you will understand everything. All right, so we are at time. So thank you everyone for listening to me. If you are curious about our IoT and Edge building blocks, you see the URLs to the various websites we have for our working groups. You can always ping me on Twitter. I'm Blueberry Coder there, or LinkedIn, or whatever platform you feel comfortable with. I'm happy to engage with you and try to find ways for you to leverage our technology and contribute to our communities. So thank you, everyone. And now if there are questions, I guess we have a few minutes to answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fre de ric. Quite interesting artifacts and a futuristic look, I must say. So open source, and to sum up those 7 points that you have talked about, I think it's fair to mention that open source is the way forward, and in a way or another, organizations would be part or need to be part of open source evolution, if evolution is the right word to use. So if they haven't done so, I think it's about time to strategize and to have open source part of their future plans. In all cases, I don't see any questions to you, but great session like always. Thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to Fre de ric.